Hello, and welcome to the Scriptures Are Real podcast. This is the podcast where we talk about elements of the Scriptures that have become more real to us because we believe that helps us draw more power out of them, and we need all the help we can get. I'm your host, Kerry and and I'm so happy to have with me today my friend, Melinda Brown. Welcome, Melinda.
Hey, thank you. I'm happy to be here, Kerry.
So glad to have you with us. I guess I should call you, I'll call you Mindy. You
That's
said that
great.
maybe you'll feel like you're in trouble if I'm calling your full name. I get that. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, my pleasure. Happy to be here.
We're sponsored this week by the Society for the Preservation of Ancient Religious Cultures, or SPARC. This is a fantastic organization I love being part of. They help fund my excavation. So you join it for as low as $35 a year, and that goes towards funding my excavation or others, like we've helped Petra and Megiddo and some of the excavations of Fremont Indians next to Utah Lake and things like that. It's a fantastic organization. We do monthly lectures. Once you join, you can get on the website and access the video library for all the lectures. We started this in 2020. Well, Spark has been around since 2015, but we started making it something you could join publicly since 2020. All sorts of topics, scripture topics, archaeology topics, ancient world topics, just a lot of fun things. So go to sparkproject.org. That's Spark with a C because it's the Society for the Preservation of Ancient Religious Cultures. So sparkproject.org and join, and you'll love it. Well, let me tell the audience just a little bit about you, Mindy, and then we can have you tell us more. We'll have you tell us the really interesting stuff. But Mindy's lived in Provo for 20 years, and she serves in a BYU, well, a singles ward with Heritage Hall's BYU students there for a number of years, and she teaches their temple classes and all sorts of things. She's the author of Eve and Adam, Discovering the Beautiful Balance, which was published by Deseret Book in 2020, and she's just finishing up her second book with Deseret Book called Approaching the Temple. I'm excited for that to come out. I know you're also in a master's program at Duke. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that and about your family. I know you have children, grandchildren, that kind of a thing. So
Yeah.
we'd love to hear more about that and everything else. What else should we know about you?
Okay, great. Well, I graduated from BYU many, many years ago with an economics degree and then took a pivot as life does, right? And now am in divinity school at Duke Divinity School, finishing up a master's degree in Christian practice, which has been an unbelievably joyful, wonderful adventure. I've really, truly loved every minute of it. I will be sad when it's over. However,
great.
Yeah, thank you. My husband, children, and grandchildren might be happy when it's over. They have missed me a little bit, I think. I hope they've missed me. It's been pretty busy. I have 4 grown children with my husband, Doug, and 2 of them are married. And then we have 4 little grandsons and a 5th grandson on the way. We're kind of specializing in grandsons, apparently, and that's great.
That's
We
high
have
energy.
darling ones. Yes, it is. It's awesome. We love it.
Well,
Yeah.
congratulations on those that have come and the one that's about to come. We're so excited. This is just going to be a really fun scripture block. This is one that I think a lot of people have scriptures in that they love and they want to talk about. Some powerful stories, powerful teachings in Mosiah 18 through 24. There's no way we can cover all of it. So we'll just figure out what things we do talk about. And we'll have fun while we do it. So where would you like to take us, Mindy? What's become real to you? What would you like to talk
Sounds
about?
great. I would actually love to just focus mostly on Mosiah 18. I think there is so much good stuff there. We could spend way more than the time that we have just digging into Mosiah 18. It gets a little bit complicated with all the fun, awesome stories that come after, but there's so much good stuff here. I'd say let's start there. And actually, I'd suggest we back up one page to Mosiah 17, because that's where we first meet Alma. And,
Right.
You probably have thought about this last week, but it's nice to kind of refresh what we know about him. We get this little block of verses 2 through 4 that teach us a couple of key things that we want to know about Alma. First, it says that he was a young man and he believed the words of Abinadi. So he's got a soft heart and teachable. And he knew concerning the iniquity of what had been going on there in the court of King Noah and the other priests. So he's observant and aware and maybe cautious that he was still there with them. But that he was also very brave because he began to plead with the king.
Yeah.
And you have to imagine that was a brave move for him, right?
Yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
then as the king gets angry about what Alma's saying, he fled. So he's fast because he got away, and he hid himself. So he's also clever. And then he took the time to write all the words that Abinadi had spoken. So he's learned, he's wise, he understands that he ought to get it down while it's fresh in his mind. And then when we jump into the beginning of chapter 18, first we've skipped that portion that tells about Abinadi's tragic fate, but we can assume that as Alma begins teaching people who have come to find him, that maybe they're bringing the message of what has happened to Abinadi. So
Yeah.
he's probably somewhat aware, although perhaps not. Perhaps the court kind of kept that on the down low, right?
Mhm.
And he might not have known. But then as we launch into chapter 18, we get a couple crucial other details about Alma. We read that he repented of his sins and iniquities. So he's humble, and he realizes that he wants to change. He wants some sort of transformation to come into his life because of these things, which I think is all really helpful information as we dig into this and start learning more about this. Then I think verse 2 is just a really, really important verse for us to focus on for a moment. Do you want to read that, Kerry?
Sure.
While
It
y'all are
says,
talking.
Yea, concerning that which was to come, and also concerning the resurrection of the dead, and the redemption of the people, which was to be brought to pass through the power and sufferings and death of Christ, and his resurrection and ascension into heaven. So those are some of the words of Abinadi that he taught. So it's interesting. That's where we see what he focused on, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And that it's completely Christ centric.
Yeah.
It's totally focused on Christ, which I think is crucial as we launch into a chapter all about the development of Christ's church among these people, the community and the unity that's building up, and then the covenant relationship. It's really all about this covenant relationship that this community is entering into in a really physical, embodied sort of way, and what that is going to do to them. And so I think verse 2 is such an important piece of that story that then we can look into, right?
Amen. There's so many things
Uh,
that people can take away from what Abinadi taught, but I love the focus that Alma has. Like this is what he sees as the central message, and it is the central message
yeah,
of
yeah.
Abinadi's teachings and the gospel in general.
That's right. That's right. I think it's such a good reminder to us that it really boils down to that. And if we were going to spend a good chunk of time talking with our children and our family and all of our loved ones about the significance of covenant relationship, starting with baptism, this is a great model to follow. I think Alma's got that figured out, right?
Amen to that.
Yeah. So I love that. Okay, so then as we kind of take a little bit of a 30,000-foot view for a second at the rest of the chapter, there's something really worth noting, I think, here. And I've heard you, Kerry, talk about this before, and I think you're with me that we think this is significant. When you see what is known as an inclusio,
Yeah.
right, or a bookended segment, and in verse 3 and verse 30, we have one of these, and I'll point out what it is. But first, let me just say that in my opinion, when we bump into an inclusio, first of all, it's a beautiful literary device, and it really shines a light on how thoughtful the authors, these prophets, were to make sure they were recording something in the most effective way they could possibly use the limited words and the limited space on these plates and all of that. And so to me, it's like just flashing a light saying, pay attention to everything in between these two kind of bookends, right?
Yeah.
And so what we hear here that gets repeated is in verse 3, it reads, "And as many as would hear his word, he did teach, and he taught them privately that it might not come to the knowledge of the king." And it's that sentence that gets repeated in verse 30 at the end there. Oh, excuse me, 31. It says that they might not come to the knowledge of the king. And that may seem not like the most important detail in this story, but I think it's significant that it is used as an inclusio because what comes between it is so valuable for us to think about as highly significant.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
And to add, I mean, I think it's even larger if you see verse 4 and a little bit of 5 focuses on, and this is what had all happened at Mormon, at the waters of Mormon and so on.
Yes.
And you get that
Yes.
also in 30, right? So
Yes.
it's this all happened in Mormon, and it was a great place called Mormon and so on and so on. So that and the teachings that they don't want the king to know about are that sets up what we might call the waters of Mormon pericope, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly right. And actually, I wanted to spend a minute focusing on that idea
Oh, great.
that it's this place that all of
Yeah.
this is happening. I think, and this is not an original thought. I've heard lots of other scholars talk about this. I don't want anybody to think I thought of this. This is out there for sure. But I think we tend to maybe default to this idea that the Book of Mormon is Mormon's editorial collection and it's the prophet Mormon that we're thinking of. But I think this chapter is trying to really make a point that, oh, this is about a place that was so powerful and a sacred thing happened with a real transformation that took place among a big group of people, that unified them in a really key idea. And maybe the title is actually more about what happens in a place of promise, like this promised land that they're referring to as the land of Mormon, the waters of Mormon, the forest of Mormon. And it just repeats over and over and over again, especially there in those first few verses from, I guess, about verses 4 through 8, we get all those ideas. And then in 16, excuse me, kind of there in the middle, it highlights them again, the place of Mormon, the waters of Mormon. And then, like you said, in 30, it just goes through that whole litany of phrases to describe this place. It's almost like it's saying, don't miss that we're really talking about what happened right here,
Yeah.
right? And I think, oh, excuse me, go ahead. What were you
No,
going
no,
to
no.
say?
Good. I didn't want to interrupt you. Keep going.
Oh, well, I was just going to say that I think it's helpful just to draw those ideas and connect a few dots there. To jump ahead to third Nephi,
Mhm.
and in chapter 5, verse 12, we read about Mormon, the person Mormon, actually being named after this place.
Right.
And that's really valuable, right? It says, I am called Mormon, being called after the land of Mormon, the land in which Alma did establish the church among the people, yea, the first church which was established among them after their transgressions. So I think he's trying to say, like, this isn't like my book, right?
Yeah.
That's not his point. Um, and then I also think it's useful if we want to go back, even turn a few more pages there to 3 Nephi 21 in verse 22, it makes that message one more time where it says, but if they will repent and hearken unto my words and hearken and harden not their heart, excuse me, I will establish my church among them, and they shall come in unto the covenant and be numbered among this, the remnant of Jacob, whom I have given this land for their inheritance. So I think we kind of have like multiple witnesses that what we are about to really dive deep into in Mosiah 18 is kind of what it's all about,
Yeah.
right?
I would agree. And I would say in some ways the ideas are not mutually exclusive,
Yeah, true.
in that Mormon, as you said, clearly identifies with what happened here. Right.
Yeah,
He enough to where it's not just that he was named after it. He needs us to know he's named
yeah,
after this.
yeah, that's
And
exactly right.
yeah, and this is a place where we're going to talk about all sorts of stuff, but it's all going to revolve around covenants in one way or another. And Mormon himself, I mean, we'll get to this like many, many, many months from now. But when we get to when he's writing, and the last things he says is, "Hey, I need you to know you're of the house of Israel. You're of the covenant." He has this amazing covenant emphasis,
Mhm.
and so it being what Mormon's focus. So if it's the Book of Mormon named after Mormon, then that's going to tell us, well, it's going to be his one of his focus, which is Christ and covenant.
Yeah.
And if we're going to do it, well, it's named after the place of Mormon. Well, it's Christ and covenant. So they're
Yeah.
intertwined enough that it may be impossible to untangle them, but it
Yeah.
certainly helps us recognize where we need to focus.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's exactly right. And I might just mention here, one of the kind of speakers recently on this topic said something really lovely about this, and maybe you were there to hear this, but President Kevin Worthen, the former BYU president, in one of his final devotionals on campus, he talked about hearts knit together in love. That was delivered in September of 2021. And he was talking about this belonging community. And he said, the followers of Alma, whose hearts were knit together in love, came to that blessed state when they were gathered together in a compact, proximate society in a land called Mormon. Their experience there caused them to revere that place. Then he goes on to say, I hope that because of our efforts to create a community of belonging, like here at BYU or in whatever community you're
Yeah.
in,
Well, I think
you
President
might.
Nelson's wanted a church to be that.
Yeah,
But anyway,
that's
sorry.
exactly right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we hear a lot about this belonging community, but I hope you would think it's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
Um, and for me, as I've thought about that and as I've kind of considered like how this has become real to me, um, that I'm kind of living through a kind of poignant example of this currently, and maybe you felt this way too. I know I'm not the only one within my community. You mentioned I live in Provo, and as probably many of your listeners are aware, our Provo kind of hillside, what will soon be called the Rock Canyon Temple, has been closed, and it's going to undergo a massive renovation.
Yeah.
Basically, it's going to come all the way down and then be rebuilt. It's not going to look the same. It's going to be a really major change to those of us who see it there on the hillside as a real beacon of light and hope and meaning to us because of the experiences we've had there. And I mean, I suppose in some ways it's good because it's helped me appreciate and verbalize my gratitude so much more clearly to the Lord for having this temple in the last 20 years of my life. And even before then, when I was here as a student. But I just have thought so many times about what a special, beautiful place that has become to me. And it's actually painful for me to drive by it. I kind of divert my eyes because it is so sad to think that that's going to be different. And of course, it will be another temple and it will be wonderful, but I'm having a difficult adjustment period dealing with that. And I know many of my friends and loved ones, my daughter's struggling with it. We're
Yeah.
all kind of mourning the loss of this sacred space, right?
Yeah. My wife, who was a temple worker up until the day it closed,
Oh,
yeah, she's having that same thing. Like, oh, she's excited and
yeah,
sad at the same time.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's
But
and it is because where these special events happen, where we draw closer to God,
yeah.
uh, we become attached to the memory and the feeling, but the place as well.
Yeah, I think that's really true. It is significant to me, and that's one way this chapter 18 has become very, very real to me recently, is that I understand because I have those feelings about such a place. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's one thought I have on that. But okay, thoughts on that before we dive into what's in the middle of
Now,
this?
let's keep going.
Okay, great, great. So when we look at what then happens in the middle, I'm going to just tell you a little bit about one thing I like to do, and I'll hold this up actually for your viewers who are watching, but I'm just like, oh, except that I'm all blurry. I'm just really a color coding sort of fanatic. And one thing I've discovered in color coding my scriptures um, is patterns that emerge in that color coding. And as I started to dive back into these pages in the last little while here, I was reminded that these are some of the most interestingly patterned color coded pages. And by that, I mean, for me, I use brown to represent agency. So something that we're doing or being asked to do kind of on our side gets kind of underlined in brown. And then
Now
green.
the
Oh
fact
yeah,
that
go
your
ahead.
last name is Brown, does that mean we should read something into this, or is there something going
No,
on here? All
no,
right,
I
just
guess
checking.
I hadn't thought of that. No. And so the other color that's so key is green, which actually is my favorite color more than brown, but green represents Christ and his atoning love in my mind. So on this first page, especially Mosiah 18, 3 through 14, it's just brown, green, brown, green, brown, green, brown,
Uh,
green, which I think is so fascinating because that's really what the physical action of participating in an ordinance that signifies such a sacred covenant relationship should look like: atoning love, agency, atoning love, agency, atoning love,
mm.
agency. It really should go back and forth. And that's kind of a fun exercise. That it might be interesting.
Yeah, I'm going to have to try
Fun
that
to think
because it
about
is a
that.
great description of the covenant in many ways, isn't it?
Right?
But yeah,
Yeah.
that's all right. I'm gonna try that and see so you can visually see the pattern. That sounds like a fun
Yeah.
activity.
Yeah. And it emerges tons of places throughout the Book of Mormon for sure. And in other scriptures as well. But it is fun. You really see it in the Book of Mormon, which is always a reminder of what a valuable resource it is for us and what a blessing it is, right? So as I go through and read kind of everything that's in between these inclusio verses, right? Two things jump out at me, and that's kind of where I'd like to just put a little bit of focus here, is what we see in terms of physicality, of like the embodied actions that
Hmm.
we see these folks doing and we're having described to us, and then also the communal aspect, the plural language of things. And for me, I think those two ideas are really key to not just this chapter, but the whole idea of what covenant belonging is about. It takes our bodies, right? It's meant to be experienced in mortality because it's very transformative and it shapes us as we practice these ways of living. And I would characterize them as Christ's ways of living, right? That
Good.
we're really clearly following his example in how we're doing this. And Alma draws that out so beautifully in, of course, his really key scriptures that so many of us kind of know the main thoughts by heart. The willingness to bear one another's burdens and mourn with those that mourn, and covenant those or comfort those that stand in need of comfort, and stand as a witness of God at all times and in all things and in all places, that ye may be, and even until death. Again, it's that highlight on this is the mortal experience that's really crucial. So those are verses 8 and 9. Um, and and I think when we then zoom out a little bit again and look for those embodied elements and communal elements, it's causes us to pause and think, how am I doing in feeling this? Like, why, where, and why, and how does my body matter so much in my covenant relationship? And am I sharing it with everybody around me in a way that's unifying and pulling them in, that I'm reaching out, that's knitting us together, right? And of course, that's the other really beautiful favorite phrase in this idea of having our hearts knit together in love, one towards another. Um, so thoughts on that for
Yeah. Yeah, and
pile
I
ahead?
mean, I don't want to. If I take away from anything that you're about to say, then we'll just
No,
edit it
that's
out or
okay.
something. But so I'm really big into what academically is called ritual theory,
Yes.
and both of those will, I mean, both of the things you're talking about really impact an element of ritual theory, and that is when you become the symbol. So all of
Yes.
our rituals, or you could say all of our ordinances are rituals, and vice versa.
Yeah. Hmm.
Um, Involve a physical action. There's a
Yes.
physical symbol. So the symbolism is important. The more physical the symbol, the more we remember it, and so on.
Hmm.
So, and kinetic movement and action imprints that memory a little bit stronger, right? Um,
Yes.
but there's always that physical symbol. But when you become the major symbol, right? So, like if you're being set apart or ordained or something, someone puts their hands on your head, that's kind of the major symbol, and it touches you, and that point of contact is still important, but probably more than in any other ritual, baptism, you are the symbol, right? It's
Yes.
about what
Yes.
you are doing, and And so the kinetic movement does something, but it's also that and I think this is that kind of outward and knitting element. um it sends so much of a stronger message when you are the symbol, right? So
Hmm.
this is it strengthens your commitment because you are the message, but it also strengthens everyone else knowing your commitment because you are the message. And so I think that
Yes.
element of ritual theory, most actually academic theories, I think, have as much hogwash as they have something good in them. There's always something of both, and that's true of theories I've put out there. But this thing I think is really good. I love this element of ritual theory where I think it's dead on, and I have felt it in my own life.
Yeah, I agree completely. Actually, one of my professors loves to use the phrase rituals deeply lived in
Yes.
this idea of it needing the physicality of it, that's
Yes.
actually absolutely crucial to the experience. Like you said, there's this element of people watching it happen, not only because you are publicly making a pledge in doing this publicly, even though this is a very private, hidden little group, right?
Yeah.
It's
But
still,
it's
you're
still
not,
public for
yeah,
them.
yeah, you're not afraid to give evidence that you choose this.
Yeah.
And it's such a
Or at least to the
crucial,
group that you are choosing to
yeah,
join, right?
yeah, that's exactly right. And a crucial agency driven step, right? Like I
I like that
often
phrase.
think, and right, and I talk with my temple students a lot about this too, that like you don't accidentally pay tithing, right? No,
Yeah, yeah,
nobody accidentally does
that's
that.
right.
And you don't accidentally take the sacrament. I mean,
Yeah.
you choose, you got to move your arm. You don't accidentally get baptized. There's an agential step that must happen in doing it. And in that regard, ordinances are really, really powerful, like you described. So I think that's beautiful here in these pages. I love that.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah, yeah. One of the fun things in here, my favorite little bit, maybe you have a favorite too, that kind of highlights that idea, but I love that they clapped their hands for joy. Like that just, they were feeling it. And I think it's such a good reminder, um, just how crucial our bodies are to a soul experience, right? Our bodies are absolutely this crucial piece of our soul. It's not 95% spirit, 5% body. It's really both interwoven together. It's why this life is so valuable for us to learn things, because we feel it deeply. It becomes ritual deeply lived and truth deeply lived and deeply felt. And I think that's illustrated beautifully here.
I love what you're saying, and it brings up a really important point, and that is that your whole soul has to be involved in this, right? So
Yeah,
you
exactly.
can go through the outward motion, your body can
Mhm.
do the motion, but if your spirit is not fully consecrated in it, now none of us are perfectly consecrated.
Yeah.
When I'm saying fully,
Yeah.
I don't mean perfectly, but I mean we really want this, and we
Yes.
really want to try. That's
Yep.
and we may be asking, help me in my unbelief as we do it, but fine, we're
Yeah.
really trying. Then that means your whole soul is involved, and then the ordinance and the power and effects of it really happen. And it doesn't happen until then, right? So we
Yeah.
have to talk about being true covenant keepers instead of just going through the motions covenant keepers and that kind of a thing. And it starts
Yeah.
with that full integration, the soul, that's the spirit and the body both fully engaged in this, because it's what you want with all your heart, might, mind, and strength.
That's right. That's right. And I think this chapter also highlights the order of those events quite significantly. Sometimes we might think, especially in the modern Western world, we might think, well, I don't want to commit to something until I've done all the
Yeah.
things and it's deeply ingrained and I'm positive. And what this is showing is you can do that for a little bit, but actually you ought to commit.
Yeah.
Like commit and then invest and then practice. Because I think something that some scholars have written beautifully about is this notion that conversion can happen quite quickly. And that seems to be what has happened to the people who have left the town or city and come and found Alma, and they're listening to him. They're having a big change of heart. Something's happened to them and they're desiring this. They want this. But transformation tends to happen slowly,
Yep.
and it happens through practice, right? And doing it over and over again. And I think to me, another thing I really love about this chapter is verses about 9 through 11,
Yeah.
where Alma kind of explains to them, okay, so if you're going to commit to this, let me just tell you kind of what this is going to look like in the coming days and months and years. This is how this ought to transform you. You ought to want to comfort those who stand in need of comfort. You ought to want to mourn together and bear one another's burdens. Recently, Elder Renland has said repeatedly in a couple different key messages he's delivered, especially at the BYU campuses, this idea that those are really the fruits
Right.
of living Christ's covenant way, right? That's not actually what we're covenanting precisely, and this kind of gets into the weeds a little bit, but that's what committing to take Christ's name upon us and live like him and witness him in everything we do, that's what it's going to look like. And something that comes up a lot in the classes I teach about the temple is kind of a question a lot of young people have about the temple recommend interview process and this idea of why do we need to qualify for the temple and shouldn't it be open to everyone? And I think this is a lovely example of actually, this is a really transparent way to address, look, we want you to commit. We'd love you to take this step, but let's be sure we're clear on what transformation you're shooting for, where you're aiming, trying to align what you know, what you want, and what you do. Because what you do tends to lag behind those others, right? Because
Right.
our bodies need some channeling and harnessing. And there's a lot to learn and a lot of practice to be done. And again, it's that soulful learning. It sometimes they don't always move in perfect synchronicity, right? And so we need to keep practicing and keep trying and keep learning and yay, repentance. I mean, it all works. Like it's a beautifully designed plan. So I don't
And
know.
there's so many things you've said that are so profound that
Oh,
I mean,
goodness.
I'm
Thanks. I don't
thinking
know
about
about
this
that, but
idea of commitment, and there's all sorts of evidence from even from very secular scholars that people who are willing to just commit to marriage and be married have much more
yes.
successful marriages than people who feel like, well, I need to try this first, and we live together for a long time, and then
Yes.
we get married. And who knows how much of that is the person's mindset? Well, I bet it doesn't really matter if it is because that's their mindset ahead of time that they're not sure about it. It's still because
Yeah.
you're willing to commit, right? You have to be willing to commit to make this stick. And as you said, the initial commitment, that initial feeling, so many of us have that. No one stays with it perfectly, right? It's the
Mhm.
repetition that's important. So thank goodness for the sacrament, right?
Yes,
We only
exactly.
got baptized and then never were having to recommit, then I don't think we'd progress the way
Yeah.
we do when we are weekly recommitting and weekly reaping of those benefits. It's a beautiful, powerful process that God puts us through. And if it's all right,
Yeah.
maybe I could just speak a little bit to what you were talking
Yeah.
about with Elder Renlund as well. And I've made
Definitely.
this point one other time on the podcast, but I want to do it again just because I know I, in classes and writings and elsewhere, and almost everyone I know, including almost every bishop I know, when we talk about the covenant, we've lumped everything together where we've said this is the covenant we make at baptism, and it includes uh, verses like 8 where it talks about coming to the fold of
Mhm.
God and bearing witness, and then as you say 9 where it talks about the effect we have with others. And I had heard, and I've told the story before, but I think it bears repeating. I'd heard from someone, we were working on some covenant things for the church, and I'd heard from someone that had been in a correlation meeting that said, well, President Nelson has said that this first part is the covenant, that your relationship with God, and yes, second great commandment, that's part of our covenant, that we love others, but all these other things, that's not really part of the covenant. And I thought, well, sometimes when you hear things third, fourth hand, I don't know if we're getting that right. But then I heard Elder Renlund just right after that saying that same thing, and then he said it again, as you said. So I want to make sure that we're clear on that. And I love the way that you said it. We do
Mhm.
covenant with God to be His people,
Yeah.
to take His name upon us, to be gathered into His fold, to bear witness of Him, and so on. And then we naturally, because of that, when we love God that much, we will naturally love his children, and all of these other things will flow from it. This wanting to bear each other's burdens and mourn with those that mourn, and take care of people. And I think if we're going to talk about the covenant path, this is a great way to measure it. If we are going to say the covenant path is, and then we have a list of 6,000 checklist things,
Mm.
that gets to be overwhelming. Now, checklists are fine, and there are things we have to do, but that gets to be overwhelming because none of us are going to do all that perfectly. But if we think of it this way, we love God so much that we do what he wants us to do, and that causes us to love each other so much that we try and serve each other. So the real barometer of whether you're on the covenant path or not, and this is what I talk about in one of these books about blessings on the covenant path. I think the greatest barometer for whether you're on the covenant path or not is, do you love God? Do you love his children? And are you acting on that love? And if
Yeah.
so, you're on the covenant path, right? You will naturally be on that path. It's just what flows because of that deep, as you say, soulful inner commitment.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's exactly right. Well said. I think those are really key, important ideas, and worth remembering too that it's all about Christ as the model. That all
Yes.
the things that we commit to, I mean, when we think about the covenants of that we commit to in receiving our own endowments, when we talk about obedience and sacrifice and loving others and chastity and consecration, those are all things that Christ modeled perfectly. And those are things that he's asking us to live like him, because this is actually the happy way of living. Like, this is how relationships work well. And the communal nature of uh, of figuring this out in a group of people who not only are trying for the same thing, but because of that are also quite patient, hopefully, that we're allowing ourselves to kind of practice and learn on each other, which is going to mean lots of repenting, lots of forgiving of each other, lots of apologizing as we make errors and mistakes. Um, in doing all of that, we will gradually kind of embed it into our souls of what it feels like to live the happy way of Christ's way of life. And I think that's what we see play out beautifully in this chapter. I mean, it's amazing that by the end of this chapter, and who knows the timeline on this, if this was hours or days or a week or two or three or whatever, but they've all grown together so well that when danger comes, they are okay to leave together and off they go kind of into the wilderness, um, because this is now who they are and what really matters to them. So
Uh,
that's a pretty profound idea, right?
it
At the
really
end.
is.
Yeah.
And I hope that we're just going to end up talking about chapter 18, but I hope that as
Yeah.
our audience does all the reading with chapter 24 and everything that's happening with them, that
Yeah.
you'll keep in mind that this is how it began, with that covenant community, belonging to God, belonging to each other episode that we're talking about here. That's what made everything else possible. And so have that lens on as you do the rest of that reading.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think every one of these amazingly intricate, I mean, you could make a pretty fun movie about all these stories that follow in rapid
Yeah.
succession, right? All of them are giving evidence to what is laid out in this chapter of the goals, right? You've got to act, you've got to use your agency, you're going to work in combination, you're going to collaborate with the Lord in all this and with each other, and you're going to do it together. And it's going to be like your little personal laboratory with all your people around you to practice on and learn on when you have the conversion come over you. I mean, Alma did it too. The fact that he left that court in really dangerous circumstance, right? You got to know that that was a scary, brave thing he did, and running away like that and everything that's going to follow. I mean, he's leading by example. And I just think he's amazing. I just, it's so fun to get to this Alma part because, of course, he's there woven in everything else and his descendants and all this. And it gets really exciting as we keep going. And so, anyway, I think this is just such a fabulous chapter.
I couldn't agree more. And the that communal aspect. I don't know if you had more you wanted to say about
No,
the
that's good.
communal aspect, but
No, you go
uh,
ahead.
I think we can't forget that the scriptures, when they talk about the covenant and about the blessings of the covenant, almost all the time it talks about it for God's people as a whole. It's not much of a focus for God's,
Yeah.
this person or that person. Now, of course, that part's true,
Hmm.
and to some degree we live our lives individually, but only to some degree, right?
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
in fact, I especially noticed that when you get the Book of Mormon, it kind of starts to begin with. It talks about what we might call communal salvation, communal covenant, just incessantly, and it starts to talk a little bit more about individual. But when Christ comes, he only talks about it in the communal sense,
Yeah.
and it kind of is this course correction, and then from there on out, that's how they stay with it. And I find we live in such an individualistic society that that's really difficult for people to compute and say,
Hmm.
what do you mean? Of course, salvation is individual, and so on.
Yeah.
And I think it is to some degree the effect of living in a society that says it's all about you. And if we were in some other societies that where no, it's about the group and the taking care of others and forget about yourself, that might be less of a leap. But that's not very many cultures anymore.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
that's right.
so I think
Yeah.
we oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, no, you go ahead.
I was
Finish
going
your
to
thought.
say I think we just need to remember that the focus can't be on yourself. If you're
Hmm.
going to be saved and you're focusing on yourself, you won't be saved.
Yeah.
He that loses his life for my sake shall find it, is what Christ says. If we are just consumed with this love for God and for others, if
Hmm.
busy trying to save others, we'll end up being saved.
That's
If we're
exactly
trying
right.
to draw closer to God so that we can know what he would have us do to help others, if we're trying to have the Spirit with us so we can help others, to know what he wants us to do, rather than I'm drawing closer to God to help myself, you have a ceiling how far you can get with that focus. But if you're doing it because I love God, I want to know what he wants me to do, and I want to know what he wants me to do for others, there's no ceiling to that.
Hmm.
And so I think we can understand, if we think of it in those terms, we'll understand this communal and this belonging sense a little bit better, that I think
Hmm.
was so inherent to Alma's little community here, right? That they got
Yeah.
it. It was natural to them. We have to get ourselves there, get ourselves out of the me mindset, and just
Hmm.
forget about yourself. It's not about you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the other thing that's so fascinating about this, and I mean, this kind of gets into social psychology and group dynamics and things, but in such a me-focused, independent sort of culture as we all live in the Western world typically, something that for some reason goes closely with that, especially these days, seems to be this sense of, um, well, it's not fair if anybody gets left behind, and why should I get this but not them? And so there is
Yeah.
this element, but the thing that's amazing and so beautiful about the divine plan of happiness is if you are doing it right and you continue in this covenant relationship and you keep deepening it with each further covenant, you get into such a place, like just to get yourself to the state of consecration where
Right.
everything you want to do is uh, God's will and building his kingdom and helping others come with you. What you're actually doing is lifting everybody up. And
Yes.
there doesn't need to be any hierarchy or layers, but it really, if you lead with loving God and doing it his way, it's enormously effective of bringing everybody up to the same level. It's like you get this highest common denominator situation happening, and then it's irrelevant that there might be layers or whatever, because you're all going to get there together, and it's like you're
Right.
weaving this net that is then such a more effective net to lift the kingdom of God upward because you are woven together. I think that's, to me,
Beautiful.
is a beautiful image.
It is a beautiful image, and it comes back to your idea about agency, right? If
Yeah.
so, we could put it this way: if you are, and I guess that whole soulful commitment, if you are consecrating, if you're giving things to help people, or you're doing this because you have to, or
Mhm.
because someone makes you,
Yeah.
then it will help them a little, and it may actually hurt you, or it might help you a little bit. It's just as likely it's going to actually make you a less happy and less good person. But if you are choosing, it's not because the church is asking you, or a government agency is forcing this upon you, or something like that. If you are choosing to help people, to give of
Yes.
your time, to give of your money, your resources, your abilities, your gifts, whatever. If you are choosing to give to help people, then it helps them more. But the change that it produces in you is incredible, and that's all because of the motive, and that's where real agency lies, right? Is in the choice
Yes.
you've made in your heart and mind.
Yes.
It's all because of that motive. So again, when you are acting out of love, the
Mm.
change is exponentially different than if you're acting for any
Yes.
other reason.
Yes. And, kind of a concluding thought to just sort of tie that all up and put a beautiful bow on it is the sense that love is not love unless it is freely given. If
Oh,
there's
good.
any element of coercion there, it's not love.
Right.
It's you come up with other words. There are lots of synonyms you could use there, but it's not love. Love must be freely given. So in a plan that is all about love, and I propose this is
Oh, yeah.
100%, this is about love between the Lord and us and others. It is all built on love. That, in my opinion, is why agency is so unbelievably critical, because that's how you show love. You have to be a free agent, if you will, and get to illustrate that yourself. And that's what it's all about. Without the agency piece, we never could have received the love or given it back or given it to others. So it just is it's a beautiful system. I mean, it's just really divinely designed, obviously.
That's wonderful and beautiful, and a great summation of the most important elements of really what's in this chapter. Again, this
Yeah.
covenant chapter that focuses on love of God and love of all mankind, which ties us back even to the doctrine of Christ and so on,
Mm-hmm.
right? And what Nephi sees in his vision and so on. The Book of Mormon is so incredibly interwoven, and these themes are so beautifully expressed in so many different ways that draw on each other. And hopefully that just keeps giving the Holy Ghost an opportunity to make an impression on our souls and change us so that we are just a little bit more. I love this soulful idea. If we keep in mind that what we mean by that is with our whole body and mind, or heart, mind,
Yeah.
and strength, however you want to say it. If
Mm-hmm.
we can have our whole soul in
Yeah.
this, then wow, what God can do with us is incredible.
Amen. Exactly right. I love it.
Well, thank you so much. This has just been so much fun. And I know I've been edified and uplifted, and I'm sure the
Me
audience
too.
has been as well. So we hope that you'll share it with people. And I'd say, first of all, just reach out, act on love in whatever way the
Absolutely.
Spirit directs you. And if that's to call your neighbor, text your friend, whatever, reach out to a family member, share these ideas, both by the way you act, but then you can teach them to other people as well. We also hope that you'll share it online using your social media channels or something along those lines, and help people know by liking and rating and downloading and sharing and reviewing and that kind of thing. And we've been asked to encourage conversations and feedback. So if the platform you listen on doesn't have a way for you to leave comments where you say, oh, I was touched by this idea, or oh, I learned this, or oh, what do you think about that? Then listen on that platform and maybe jump on something like YouTube or whatever platform allows you to leave a comment. We've been asked to encourage that. So we'd love for people to just interact. That's what we want, is to interact in positive, loving, not negative, but positive, loving ways about these things. So we hope you'll do all of that as well. We also hope you'll join us next week when Aaron Shumway from BYU Hawaii is going to talk to us about Mosiah 25 through 28 and the really powerful things that happen as Alma integrates with the larger society and takes these covenants and the organization that he's set up and makes this a larger thing. Just some beautiful, powerful stuff. Plus, his son has some things going on in there. So it's wonderful stuff. So thank you again, Mindy. You've really uplifted me. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure. It's been a great discussion. Thank you for the opportunity to dig deeper into it. I love it.
Well, bless you.